In 1957, the United States passed the first federal civil rights legislation since the Reconstruction era, the period immediately following the Civil War when the government attempted to rebuild the South and provide legal protections for formerly enslaved people. This 1957 act was designed specifically to protect the voting rights guaranteed by the 15th Amendment. This chart shows the limitations of those initial protections. By the late 1950s, only 20% of eligible African Americans in the South were successfully registered to vote. The 1957 law was hampered by administrative ambiguities that local authorities were quick to exploit. Officials used subjective literacy tests and poll taxes, mandatory fees for the right to cast a ballot, to prevent minority registration at the local level. These strategies were effective because the federal government lacked specific, granular enforcement mechanisms to monitor local polling stations. Without a way to police the registration process directly, federal authority was easily neutralized by systemic opposition in the South. This opposition was part of the Massive Resistance Movement, a coordinated effort by Southern leaders and white citizens to defy the Supreme Court's integration mandates. They aimed to block the enforcement of federal law through both legislative action and public protest. This 1954 Texas poll tax receipt illustrates the bureaucratic paperwork used to control voting access. Officials manipulated these records to hide evidence of discrimination. Since the 1957 law didn't require preserving documents, registrars could discard applications without penalty, effectively removing the paper trail. Resistance also took more violent forms. Domestic terrorists targeted schools and churches with explosives to intimidate minority communities.
Perpetrators frequently fled across state lines, moving outside the jurisdiction of local police, who were often unwilling to prosecute them. By 1959, President Dwight D. Eisenhower saw that federal authority was failing to protect constitutional rights on the ground. He concluded that the government required more aggressive legislative authority to intervene in local affairs. Local defiance had stalled federal progress. Declarations alone were no longer enough. They needed tactical, managed federal enforcement. In early 1959, Eisenhower sent a 7-point mandate to Congress. These demands were designed to address the specific procedural failures of the previous legislation, including new rules for the preservation of election records. The bill faced immediate resistance in the House of Representatives, where it was stalled in committee for 6 months. To move it forward, Representative Emanuel Celler filed a discharge petition, a rare parliamentary move that allows a majority of the House to bypass a hostile committee and bring a bill directly to the floor for a vote. A similar struggle occurred in the Senate. The legislation was sent to the Judiciary Committee, which was chaired by James Eastland, a prominent segregationist from Mississippi who worked to prevent the bill from ever reaching a final vote. Advocates of the bill had to navigate a series of procedural traps and amendments. They focused on building enough non-Southern Democratic and Republican support to outmaneuver the blockades set by their own colleagues. Forcing a floor vote required overriding the structural power Southern Democrats held over the committee system. It was a battle of political attrition that lasted until the spring of 1960. To address the disappearance of evidence, Title III of the 1960 Act made it a crime to alter or destroy election records. It mandated these documents be preserved for 22 months, ensuring the government had access to data for civil rights investigations. Title VI introduced a system for direct oversight. It authorized federal courts to appoint voting referees to physically inspect polling stations and registration offices when discrimination was suspected. This section also provided a precise legal definition of a vote. It clarified that voting includes every step of the process: registration, casting the ballot, and the final counting of that ballot. To counter intimidation, Title II made it a federal crime to flee across state lines after bombing a building. This gave the FBI the authority to investigate church and school bombings that local authorities had previously ignored. The 1960 Act moved the civil rights conflict from the realm of abstract debate into the policing of local election machinery. The federal government was now focused on the specific, technical details of how ballots were handled. President Eisenhower signed the Civil Rights Act of 1960 into law on May 6, 1960. The law had clear limits. It did not address discrimination based on national origin, nor did it provide the tools to instantly dismantle the Jim Crow system of segregation. Its primary impact was the establishment of federal inspection. For the first time, the United States government had a statutory framework to penalize the obstruction of voter registration at the local level. This framework provided the operational basis for the civil rights successes that followed. The administrative oversight established in 1960 was later expanded to implement the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The 1960 Act codified the specific federal actions used to investigate and penalize voting obstruction. By creating the procedural machinery for intervention, the government turned constitutional guarantees into a system of managed oversight.